1 Corinthians 16. Lord willing, we'll have most of chapter 16 covered today, and then a review with the end of 1 Corinthians 16. We've been in 1 Corinthians over a year now, and then we'll start 2 Corinthians. There's about a 4 to 5 year gap between 1 and 2 Thessalonians and 1 and 2 Corinthians. And Corinthians, like Thessalonians, is written one book after another. So we'll be in 2 Corinthians, and we're going chronologically through the New Testament. And after 2 Corinthians is Romans. All right, and we're not going to go quickly through Romans. We're going to go slowly through Romans and get all of the meat that's in that book and the logic that Paul gives us for our salvation, our sanctification, and our growth as Christians. 1 Corinthians 16 is a conclusion that if you were, verse 58 of chapter 15 was the climax, this is the falling action and the denouement, if you like literature and like that picture of a letter that gives a lot of truth, a lot of hard-hitting exhortation to leave selfishness in how you use yourself and how you interact with other Christians and what you eat and what you don't eat and how you observe the Lord's table and how you look at the gospel and how you look at the resurrection of Christ. All of that's been the challenge to the Corinthians in this book. And now we get to 1 Corinthians 16, and we see some very practical suggestions and exhortation. And he kind of is changing gears here from, you guys have a lot of weaknesses and you should be doing this and you're not doing this, to he treats them as beloved brothers, as we saw in verse 58. And now you can see the close connection that Paul has with the Corinthians and what he expects them to do. Last month I got to go to Florida, and part of that trip, most of that trip, was a fellowship with other pastors and other leaders in our circle of Christianity. And what they have done, and I did not know they were doing this, is they collected funds from all these different churches. There were probably 220 pastors and their wives present, and so we got together, and one of the sessions they gave was showed on the screen, and they gave me a PowerPoint. I was going to show it, but I didn't think showing other people's pictures was best. So I'll just summarize what they did. So they collected $70,000 from churches, and there were, in our Arch Ministries network, there were 14 different ministries and people that they gave $5,000 each. And they showed pictures of a widow that her husband passed away with COVID in the last year. They showed another widow and 3 little children who was younger than me, in his 30s, and he died of cancer. And he used to come to our fellowship, and he had cancer for over a year and passed away. Another 43-year-old pastor from New York died in his sleep, and no explanation. And so they gave $5,000 to his family. And there was a church building, a really small little town in upstate New York. They were to help with windows, and other ministry in Alaska, and just all around the country. And it's so encouraging to get together with those guys and ladies from Florida. And I have met Pastor, I'm going to go speak at a marriage conference at a church in Massachusetts, and I met the pastor from Massachusetts in Florida. And then we came back, and we have been friends ever since. And so it is great to get together with other Christians that are doing the Lord's work, and they are abounding in the work of the Lord. And we really don't have an excuse to be isolated because of the internet, but if anyone had an excuse to be isolated in the Roman Empire, it would have been Paul and the Jerusalem church and the church in Antioch, and they were scattered in an area that's probably the size of the United States, and they didn't have any internet, they didn't have email, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have FaceTime, they didn't have Skype, and they didn't have ways to connect and wire money. So what we'll see today is a church that knew other churches and their need and was able to meet those needs. A heart to help others. The key to ministry to others starts with your heart. I can't change your heart, but God can. If you read one of our missionary emails that I sent you, there is a missionary that focuses on building relationships, and he has a friend who he is reaching out to, and this man says, no, there's a wall here, and you can't break through this wall. And our missionary friend said, yes, I know I can't, but I know someone who can. And there is a God in heaven, and he is wonderful and majestic and full of glory. And as we behold his glory, we are changed from glory to glory by the Spirit of our God. As we gather together as his people and sing his praises, our heart should be warmed. And you may have come here not with just your body cold, but your heart was cold. You came here just barely coming here spiritually and hoping to stay awake, and that was your goal. But now in singing and seeing God's people, you are encouraged, and your heart, you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to change. And this is the power of the gospel in us. This is the power of the resurrection that awaits us, and that we want to be abounding in the work of the Lord. So verse 1, and we just read 1 Corinthians 16. The key to ministry to others starts with our heart. God humbled us and saved us. He changed our heart. He gave us a new heart, a heart that would no longer want to serve ourselves, but to serve him and to serve others. He saved us so that we would humbly serve other people. The proud Corinthians and we proud Americans of 2022 need this book because we are selfish like them, both privately and publicly. And we have seen ourselves in this book as we have used people and not concerned about what other people think and just doing whatever we want to do and believe whatever we want to believe and act however we want to act. And we can't do this as a church. And 1 Corinthians has challenged us to lay aside our selfish pride in order to serve God and others. Now, practically speaking, if you're going to serve someone, a good place to start with helping others is where? Ask them if they need help financially. Do you like it if you really have a financial need, when someone asks you, hey, is there anything I can do to help you financially? And you might say, I just don't really like to let people know about my personal finances. But if you have a need and you have been the recipient, and now some of you are the givers primarily to meet people's needs, you want to know where the needs are. And I really appreciate those of you that are talking with people and building relationships with people so that whenever there's someone that has a need, like oil prices, you heat with oil, those prices have gone way up. If you had an oil delivery in the last month, you know how expensive it is just to heat your house. And I've heard in my Liberty, electric bills are going to go up a certain percentage. And so people have needs just to heat their house and to have electricity. So if you have people that you know of that have needs, please let us know. And if you can meet their need, you don't even have to let us know, just meet their need. And if you want to do it privately, hey, can you give this to so-and-so? We love to do that as leaders here. Get another friend and say, hey, can you just give this? This happens way more than you realize in a church our size. And when I realized that was happening, when I came here, I'm like, I love this church. I love this idea that people are reaching out to people. So be talking with people about their life, and as with life comes people that have needs and people that have margin in their budget so that they can help meet needs. Well, this is where the Corinthian church is. They have means, and they have extra, kind of like, it sounds like their fellowship fund like we have. So verses 1 to 4. Now concerning the collection for the saints, he starts this now concerning in 1 Corinthians 7 twice, and 1 Corinthians 8. Now this is the fourth time that we see. So there was some correspondence going on, or some people that came to Paul that the Corinthians had specific questions about. And so they had a question about collection for the saints. And the New Testament calls Christians saints, holy ones. At the moment of our salvation, we become saints, and we don't have to wait for a church to declare us saints. but this is what the New Testament calls believers. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. So there is a region of Galatia, there's a region of Macedonia, and there's a region of Achaia, and you'll see Achaia, and it's kind of like states in New England. And so there is this region, it's in modern-day Turkey, is Galatia, where the Corinthians are, is modern-day Greece. And so they are part of Paul's missionary journeys. He started churches in these areas, and he told the churches in Galatia, hey, there is a need of finances in Jerusalem. We have seen this already in the book of Acts. I believe it's chapter 12, 11 or 12, where they take a collection and they send it, and this is a different time. So as persecution arises in Jerusalem, the Christians there are feeling extreme financial strain. And so they are in need, and as the apostles are letting Paul know and other missionaries that are traveling through know, hey, if there is any way that you could help, keep us in mind. So there is a heart to help others that Paul has and those traveling have as he goes from wealthy churches to poverty churches, and he tells the wealthy churches, hey, your brothers and sisters in Christ, you may never get to Jerusalem, but they're struggling. And they trust Paul. He has led many of them to Christ, and he has discipled them. And so as they come, as he travels around, he tells them about needs in other places. And he says, here's what you should do for the collection. I'm going to tell you the same thing I told to the churches in Galatia on the first day of the week. And this matches what we see in Revelation 1, that the church was meeting on the first day of the week. On the first day of the week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper. Okay, so helping others, like our sacrifice offerings last September, like what I just mentioned to you, and these churches are giving to meet the needs of 14 individuals and churches around our country, of people that have significant need and faced loss. So it takes cooperation, private preparation, and public preparation. So the cooperation is in verse 1. Okay, there's a collection of the saints. All of us are Christians here in the Roman Empire, Paul's saying. I told the churches of Galatia to set aside some money as I directed them. I'm going to tell you to do the same thing. And here's what you should do. On verse 2, first day of the week, each of you is to put something aside. That's savings. So you're getting more money at your jobs than what you can spend or what your needs are. So you have extra money, so you put some of that aside and store it up as he may prosper. So it's not like he's going to come and one time have an offering. He's saying, this need in Jerusalem is going to be significant, and to have a significant amount of funds available from Corinth for me to take back or others to take back to Jerusalem, I want you to every week, probably they're getting paid every week, to just lay aside some money on a weekly basis so that when I come, I won't even have to take an offering. You'll just have it and you'll be ready when I come. Verse 2 says, as he may prosper, and that's translated a couple different ways, but it is as you have extra funds. But it says everyone, and so we're looking for ways to discipline ourselves, and sometimes we need to work more to have more to give, and that's what Ephesians 4 says. Let him who stole steal no longer, but let him labor so that he has to give to those who have need. And you want to have a margin in your budget so that whenever you hear of people that have needs, you say, oh, well, I know that I've got 5% that was just going to go to savings instead of saving it for myself for the future. I can give some of this away because I know that I have extra. So he says in into verse 2, so that there will be no collecting when I come. So we're not going to have a special love offering as we would do today. We don't need to do that. I'm just telling you this is how it's going to work. Verse 3, and when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. So there's going to be someone who's trusted. And Paul, in the book of Acts, was trusted with Barnabas to carry funds from Antioch in the north down to Jerusalem in the south, hundreds of miles away. And now these are probably close to 1,000 miles from where they're at in Corinth all the way over to Jerusalem on a boat. It would be a long journey, and someone would have to be trusted with a letter, with a gift to Jerusalem. Verse 4, if it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. And so in Romans 15, 1 Corinthians 16, and 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, all of these three long letters of Paul, he mentions finances. And 8 and 9 of 2 Corinthians that we'll get to, Lord willing, next year or so, we'll learn what Paul teaches about giving. But here, there's no set amount. It says, as you may prosper. It's up to the individual to lay aside, to prepare for this gift. And then the church is preparing, so when Paul arrives, they send the money, trusted. And he says, if you want me to go, I will go, and they will accompany me. So you're still going to send people from your church, but I will go with them if they want to accompany me. This is probably the same trip, and you can compare this with Romans 15, 25 to 31. If we see our money as a tool to be used to abound in Christ's work, then we can purposefully and generously help other churches. And that's what's going on here. I think where I fall short in pastoring in New England is that I don't often talk to other pastors about financial needs that they have in their church. I have friends. I'll get together in a book club of 6, 7 of us that meet a couple times a year. And then we get together, and I'll get together with coffee for other pastors outside of that. We'll talk about other things. But as far as a church that has needs, this isn't a question we usually ask because we are very independent. And that's not what you see here. Staunch, independent, Bible-believing people. We see collaboration, cooperation. And this church, if you are thinking through this letter, this is a really selfish church, divisive church. And now Paul's saying to them, I want you to collect money to help people that you're never going to meet. Selfish people don't give away their money. They hoard it, or they spend it on themselves. And so what's going to develop these people into useful servants of God and have a heart for other people? Paul says, all right, I want you to abound in the work of the Lord, verse 58. And concerning the giving and the collection, I want you to lay aside each of you as you can, so that when I come, we'll all take, you send a couple people with me if you want, and we help another church. And this church is going from self-centered, self-focused to others-focused and abounding in the work of the Lord. And our money is a litmus test for our hearts. And if we are selfish in our private lives, we wouldn't want this. But if Paul was traveling today, would he come to our church because he knows the heart of our people here and say, hey, you guys, there's a church in this state, and you might never get to this state, but they have a significant need. One of the places that this group of pastors met was in Mayfield, Kentucky. And Mayfield, Kentucky does not look the same, and this is where that tornado went through and wiped out the town. And the people that lived there said, I can't even drive around here because I don't recognize the landmarks. It was destroyed, and so they helped a church, and we want to be in a place financially as a church where as needs arise that people can say, hey, Grace Bible Church is a generous church. And I don't doubt that we are a generous church, and I love pastoring a generous church. I think we need to be better connected to other churches so that when the need arises that we can let you know and we can help people. So we start an application for this. We teach new believers, young and old. Because whenever someone gets saved, and let's say that you have a budget, and you're used to spending 100% of your budget on you, and let's say as a 40-year-old you get saved. And now someone says to you, who is discipling you, okay, you don't have 100% of your budget anymore. a percentage of that budget you should consider giving to God. And you're used to, as an adult, using all of your funds and resources for you. And now, I got to give some away? I'm going to have to redo my budget. I've gotten used to this budget for years. I've gotten used to using 100% of my resources on me. And you have to start thinking, okay, right, God wants us to give to His work and abound in His work. And as God has redeemed us, we have a responsibility and the delight in helping other people. And if you have children in your home, get them at a very young age. If they're earning $1, they're giving part of that back to the Lord. Don't allow your kids to think that this is my money and I'm going to guard my money and then it's going to go in the bank and it's under my name. And we don't want to teach our kids this is not the heart to help others. This is the heart to help yourself. And no, being generous with our money is the way that God uses and reveals our heart to see if we are helping others. We all need to grow in helping other believers. None of us are perfect in this category. We all need to grow in our heart, a desire to help other people. Since all Christians are to abound in His work, which we saw in verse 58, then we all must practically help other believers. And practically helping other believers many times involves money. So helping other churches, that's what we just saw. And verse 5, I will visit you after passing through Macedonia. So Paul's plan is to come to them. And he says, I'll visit you after passing through Macedonia. Now Macedonia is north. That's where Thessalonica is and Berea is. And so when he first came to Corinth, he passed through Thessalonica, Berea, and he came south to Athens and then Corinth. And he's going to pass through Macedonia again. And he says, I intend to pass through Macedonia, and perhaps I will stay with you and even spend the winter. So if someone comes like Paul to your church and he says, I'm going to spend the winter with you, what does that mean? That means he's got to get a job in Corinth, or he's got to have some place to stay, and who's going to feed him for 3 months? Okay, so there's an expectation here that Paul has, and let's keep reading. So I might even spend the winter, he says in verse 6, so that you may help me on my journey wherever I go. So he says, help me on my journey, and the Corinthian church isn't saying, oh, there comes Paul again. He just wants a handout. That guy, they're not thinking that about Paul. Paul has, with Aquila and Priscilla, when he first got into tent making, or tent making is first mentioned in the book of Acts, Aquila and Priscilla meet Paul in Corinth. Okay, so Paul is making tents and supporting himself in Corinth, and Aquila and Priscilla are in Ephesus with Paul. He mentions them later in verse 19. So he is willing to work, but he is probably going to need a place to stay, and he's going to need some resources from the Corinthian believers to help him on his journey. Help me on my journey means I'm going to expect some financial help from you, and they think this is reasonable. Okay? And he says, wherever I go. I don't know exactly where I'm going, but wherever I go after you, I'm planning on you helping me so that you can help me on my journey. Give me, and if the Corinthians have the heart to help other churches, certainly they have a heart to help someone they know, like the Apostle Paul. Okay, and the closer our relationships with people, the more whenever those people have needs, we want to help them financially. And this is why we have a fellowship fund. But you don't even have to give to the fellowship fund. If you find someone that has a need and you're able to meet it or part of it, just put it in an envelope, give it to them, and you will brighten their day for sure. Verse 7, for I do not want to see you now just in passing. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits. And of course, as Paul spends time with them, he's going to explain anything in this letter that they didn't understand or any application of how to, okay, so you told us what not to do with this or that, so how do we need to think? And he can sit down with the leadership and the people there and help them grow in abounding in the work of the Lord. Verse 8, But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. When Paul first went to Corinth, he was told not to fear, that there was going to be hostility in Corinth in the book of Acts, and there have many people in this city. In the book of Acts, that's how God the Holy Spirit explained the ministry he had for Paul in Corinth. So when he writes back to the Corinthians and says, Ephesus is a lot like your city. I've got a huge wide open door, and there are a lot of people coming to Christ in Ephesus. That's what it was like in Corinth when Paul was first there. And in Corinth, there were a lot of adversaries to Paul's ministry. And as well in Ephesus, we can read in the book of Acts, there were a lot of worship of Diana, the temple there, and the chanting that went on for hours. That happened in Ephesus. So there are many adversaries in these major cities. And Paul says, I'm going to stay in Ephesus because I have a wide door for effective work. I'm abounding in the work of the Lord here, he's saying. And there are many adversaries. That means Satan's stronghold is diminishing. Satan doesn't like it. The world doesn't like it when they lose followers to Christ. And yet this is where God had Paul for the time. Verse 10, when Timothy comes, see that you put him at ease among you. For he is doing the work of the Lord. Same phrase that we saw last week in verse 58. As I am, so let no one despise him. Help him on his way in peace. Now, what do you think, according to the context, what do you think help him on his way means? It has to mean financially. All right, so here is Paul expecting individual people to lay aside money as they can to give to Jerusalem church. And Paul says, when I come, I'm expecting you to help me on my way, which I want to spend time with you. And the more time Paul spends with them, the more finances he's probably going to need to live on. And then I'm going to send Timothy to you. When he comes, put him at ease. Don't intimidate him, okay? And like any church, like any good-sized church, there are people that can intimidate the new guys, right? And I won't tell you who at church intimidated us when we first came, but we still remember that. Like, what? Trying to figure this out. And so when Pastor Ty comes a year and a half ago, I've talked to those people. Hey, don't intimidate him. And some of you probably still did and still do. All right? So Paul's just saying practically, okay, when Timothy comes, put him at ease, for he's doing the work of the Lord. Okay, we're on the same team. And verse 11, let no one despise him. Okay, when he goes to teach you the word, he's going to teach you in a similar way that I'm going to teach you. Don't despise him. And he's told other times in his book, in 2 Timothy, I think it is, let no one despise your youth. So Timothy was obviously younger than Paul. But instead of despising him, help him on his way in peace, that he may return to me, for I'm expecting him with the brothers. Okay, so I'm sending Timothy to you. When he comes, I'm expecting him to come back, and I want a good report of how you helped him and did not intimidate him. So what is this? Helping other churches? Now it is helping church leaders. Helping leaders like Paul when they come, Timothy when he comes, expecting financial help and resources to help. The Corinthians were trustworthy by those doing God's work to provide for their leaders' needs. This is why Paul says to them, hey, when I come, when Timothy comes, don't intimidate, but just help them. Leaders can explain suffering while doing God's work to those who know suffering while God is working. Paul directed the Corinthians to help Timothy as well. When you abound in the Lord's work, others doing the same are good targets for you for service, for your service. When you and I are doing the Lord's work, other people doing the Lord's work is where we want our money to go. And so if the Corinthians are doing the Lord's work, and we're going to see in 2 Corinthians, they're ministers of the gospel. A lot of them are abounding in the work of the Lord in the second book. And this chapter is kind of transitioning us from selfish to selfless service, and finances is where their heart and their help is growing toward other churches, toward church leaders. So some questions for application for us. Do you have margin in your personal budget to be a blessing to those doing God's work? If the Apostle Paul came through our church, would you be one that would give him confidence that you would help him, Timothy, or anyone else doing the Lord's work? Would he say, hey, go talk to so-and-so and let them know your needs? They want to help people doing the Lord's work. If not, then it might be that you don't have a lot of margin. I get it. Inflation is higher than probably your raise was for this year. That's okay to survive, but there might be things that you could cut out of your schedule or cut out of your budget so that you would have a little margin for whenever God brings us people that need help, that we can help them financially. This is a heart. This is how we develop a heart to help others, is when our funds are not ours, our body's not ours. We're looking to use our funds for the work of the Lord. Finally, verses 12 to 17. We switch gears from expecting the church to help other churches or expecting the church to help their leaders. Now verses 12 to 17. Now the leaders of the church, Paul in particular and Apollos, are going to, and Stephanas, the household of Stephanas, are going to be leaders here, and the Corinthians are going to follow them. Now, what are they to follow them in doing? Verses 13 and 14. I forgot verse 12. Verse 12. Now, concerning our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to visit you with the other brothers, but it was not at all his will to come now. He will come when he has opportunity. And this verse just fits in with, okay, remember back in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, people said, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas or Peter, I follow Christ. So this is one of those four that people said they really loved Apollos' ministry, so much so that they identified themselves as a follower of Apollos. Back in chapter 1, that was divisive, and Paul says, none of that. Everybody's following Christ. We're all on the same team. But Apollos isn't going back, and even though Paul is strongly urging him to, he is not able to, not willing to at this time, but he will come. He says, it's on my radar, I just can't get to it now. Okay, verse 13. Here comes the exhortation. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. This language sounds like warfare. It sounds like Ephesians 6, where we are to take the whole armor of God and stand firm against the wiles of the devil. So here is the Corinthians, and he says to them, be watchful, looking around. What are you looking for? You're looking for attacks on your heart. Because remember, the heart to help others is the context of this chapter, and to be abounding in the work of the Lord. And so being watchful so that we don't give in to a selfish heart again. Don't go back to the way that all this book was necessary to be written to you because you're so selfish and divisive. Don't go back there. Learn from this book and don't go back there to be selfish again. Stand firm in the faith. Know the gospel. When you see the faith in the New Testament, I believe it always refers to the faith as in saving faith. That's what we saw in the beginning of 1 Corinthians 15. Continuing, act like men. Be strong. Have a heart that is steadfast, immovable, and always is abounding in the work of the Lord. And verse 13, while it sounds like warfare and standing because the fight is all around us and in us, verse 14 is a little different tone. Let all that you do be done in love. Self-sacrificing love. Now, why does he say that? Well, he's told us what love is in 1 Corinthians 13. And he says, you are divisive. Everybody wants to be in front, but I'm going to show you a more excellent way. Here it is. Everyone should show love to one another. And love is patient and kind and doesn't seek its own and is not easily provoked. And it bears all things and believes all things and hopes all things and endures all things, and it never ends. So while we are to be watchful and standing firm in the faith and acting like men and being strong, we have to do this in a loving way. There's how the leader, Paul, is helping his followers, helping the followers of Christ to be bold in the faith and love others. This takes a balance. How to be bold and loving at the same time. Because we can be bold and brash and unloving, and people get turned off and say, I don't want to follow that, because that doesn't sound like Christ. And we can be so loving and soft with sin that we just let everybody sin and it doesn't matter. No, there is a fine line here in parenting, in leadership, in a classroom as a teacher. So many different ways that we can, if we have people under our authority, we need to be this type of leader, learning from Paul, learning from Apollos, learning from Timothy, learning from godly men and women around us to let everything that we do be done in love. So if we tell people, hey, be watchful, why is Paul saying that? Because he loves them. Why does he say stand firm in the faith? Because he loves God and he loves the truth. Why does he say act like men? Because men need to lead and be strong. So there isn't a contradictory here. It's complementary. We need a balance of both of these, being bold and strong while being loving. And the people that are those type of leaders are the people that every one of us like to follow. Someone who is bold, who knows the truth, is standing firm in the faith while doing it lovingly. That's it. That's how Christ led, and that's how Christian leaders are to lead. Second, verses 15 to 18. Now I urge you, brothers, you know that the household of Stephanas were the first converts in Achaia. And he says back in chapter 1, I didn't baptize any of you, so you can't follow me, except I baptized this family. He mentions Stephanas as the family he baptized in chapter 1. So Paul's got a close relationship, and these people were the first converts in this region, in Achaia, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the saints. So from the moment of their salvation, it sounds like, and as they grew, this household, led by this man Stephanas, is known for devoting themselves to the service of the saints. This sounds a lot like verse 58 again, doesn't it? The climax of the book. He is highlighting people that are abounding in the work of the Lord. And here is someone who we don't know very much about. He's mentioned here, he's mentioned in the first part of the book. I don't think he's mentioned outside of this book. But everyone in Corinth knows the household of Stephanas. Why? Because they're known for devoting themselves to the service of the saints. If Paul needed a place to stay, he would have to talk to the house of Stephanas because they would probably house him. They would probably be the leaders in giving and devoting their resources to the work of the Lord. Why? Because if you had a need in Corinth, you had people that, like the household of Stephanas, that would try to meet that need. Almost single-handedly at times, probably because they are so devoted to the service of the saints. If the Apostle Paul got to know each one of us, would he say this about you? Here is this family at Grace Bible Church, and they are devoted to the service of the saints. If you say no, then you're already starting to think of excuses why not. Well, we have this problem or this. Okay, all right. So you don't see devotion to the service of the saints as a noble goal, as something that you want to be known for. It's a heart problem, a heart to help others. And this is why Paul is going after the heart constantly of these Corinthians and of our hearts, so that our heart grows to help others. Now I realize if you have one spare bedroom, we're not going to put a missionary that has 8 kids at your house. Say, they're not going to fit. I get that, all right? But you might be able to provide a meal, or you might be able to provide something else. But You don't always have to have all this extra space and all this extra resources, but what do you have that you could help if we had someone come through? That's what I want all of us to be thinking. Because if we are all thinking that way, we'll have plenty of help when God sends us his servants. And this is how we want to be as church. Bold in the faith and loving others. And loving others looks like devoting ourselves to the service of the saints. Verse 16, be subject to such as these, and to every fellow worker and laborer. And if the Corinthians had trouble, personally and privately, they had trouble with submission to authority. They had trouble with submission to each other in their church. Why? Because we can read about all of their struggles in this book. And they, when told they should submit to their leaders or submit to a fellow believer in your church because this family is devoting themselves to the service of the saints and you need to submit to them, the Corinthians are like, no, not me. I'm not doing that. They can do all the service. Okay, this is how Paul, Timothy, Apollos, the leaders here that are in their church that they see on a regular basis, this is what these leaders are telling them as well. And so being submissive to servant leaders. Now, what kind of leaders are they submissive to? These people who have devoted themselves to the service of the saints. So these people are, by their example, good, godly, Christ-like, humble servants of other people. And so when Paul says, I want you to be subject to those kind of people, oh yeah, we know who they are. We often want to just give them all of the people to house and all the people to feed and all the people to give their resources to, and we don't think it's our responsibility. Oh no, it's the whole church. Everyone in the first part of this chapter was to lay aside something, and everyone is to be learning from your leaders, from your servant leaders, how to be a servant. Verse 17, I rejoice at the coming of Stephanas and Fortunatus and Achaicus, because they have made up for your absence. So if you were going to go encourage Paul remotely, who would you send to encourage him? Well, if there's a family that's encouraging everyone here, why not send them? Yes, that's why they go. And Paul says, Stephanas has encouraged me, and these other two men have been sent, and they've made up for your absence, and they've helped me. And for they refreshed my spirit as well as yours. So these men in this church, they could have been elders, they could have been deacons, they could have just been lay people in the church. They are refreshing everyone around them by their heart to help others. And he says at the end here, verse 18, give recognition to such people. Acknowledge them. How do we acknowledge people today? I think we could do a better job as a church in doing this, acknowledging people that are devoting themselves to the service of the saints. I try to say thank you to people that are giving of yourselves to others, but I forget, and I don't get everybody. And as our church grows, that's probably going to happen more. And but we can follow leaders. You can submit. Submission is an act of the will that follows your heart. If your heart is to help others, then you're going to submit to those who are servant leaders. If your heart is to serve yourself and to control your life and to control people around you, then you're not going to submit to someone else who thinks you think they're just trying to control my life. And there might be spiritual leaders that you've had in your life that just try to control you, just try to take advantage of you. And hopefully that's not the case here. And if it is, please talk to us, because we don't want to be those kind of leaders. We want to be servant leaders to help and show you what this looks like. Leaders in the church are those who are devoted to serving the saints. All believers should choose submission to their servant leaders. All should also acknowledge, and the word means to know fully, those leaders. So how are we going to apply these verses? Well, you begin to budget, and we talked about budgeting in our financial class, but budgeting is a great way so that you know what your income is, what your outgoing expenses are, and is there any margin that you have in life with your personal finances, so that if Paul wrote this letter to us and says, hey, there's a church here, they need help, can you each of you lay aside something so that we can be a blessing to this church. Will you begin to budget to giving to the Lord's work? Are you known for your boldness and love? If someone who is not bold and not loving, would they come to you and say, can you teach me how you do that? Can you teach me how to balance boldness and love in my home, in my extended family, at my workplace, at my school, whatever it is? And you know people that have a good balance here, known for boldness, known for love. Ask them if they will give you some advice. And are you known for your submission to your servant leaders? There's a lot to think about in this passage, and Paul leaves the Corinthians with a lot to think about in this first letter. And we're thankful that it's written for us by the Holy Spirit so that we can learn. I'll give you 30 seconds of silent prayer to evaluate your own heart and life in light of this passage, and then I'll close our time in prayer, and then we'll sing.